Hello. So for today's video, I want to talk about something that I get asked about a lot as an astrologer, how Vedic and Western astrology can coexist. Logically, it's very hard for a lot of people to understand this because one of them uses the Vedic astrology, which is the ancient Indian astrology, uses the sidereal zodiac, while Western astrology uses the tropical zodiac. And essentially what this ends up doing is it makes it so if you are a Pisces sun, for example, if your sun was at 20 degrees Pisces in Western astrology, it would then move to around 25 degrees Aquarius in the Vedic astrology. So a lot of people who have a certain chart in Western has their chart look completely different in Vedic. So I'm proficient. I'm a Western astrologer. I'm proficient in Western astrology, but I've just actually in the last 6 months or so started learning about Vedic astrology. And I'm not going to claim to be any type of Jyotish or someone that really fully understands it yet, but I'm starting to get some glimpses into it. So I want to make this video to use the chart that I know best, my own, to show how I've seen some of the same meanings like in the Western astrology shown in the Vedic one. So first of all, I'll flash my Western chart, and as you can see, I'm a Leo ascendant with a Pisces sun and Sagittarius moon. And you can also see the rest of my placements, such as the Aquarius and Mars Venus, and the Pluto, Uranus, Neptune, all those outer planets you see where they're placed. You have the Pluto and Scorpio in the third house. You have that stellium in the fifth house with Uranus, Neptune, and Saturn. And then the North Node sitting right at the top of my Venus, and Sun right next to Mercury in Pisces in the 8th house, Jupiter in the 11th house in Cancer. So this was very confusing for me and hard to understand. But what happens with my chart that's quite interesting, I've always felt very at the same time. So my moon is the main thing that shifts. It goes from Sagittarius in Western to Scorpio in Vedic. And I've always felt very Scorpio-like in Western astrology, like just in general. I've always felt like very, very internally intense, and a lot of the other traits are emphasized in a Scorpio moon, but while also like clearly, obviously having a Sagittarius moon, which is how I am with traveling and with learning and just I could go on about the different Sagittarius. It's very obvious to anyone that knows me that there's a Sagittarius moon. So when you look at my Western chart, so if we're missing out on the fact that, on this Scorpio moon, where does that show up? Where does that inner intensity show up? Well, it shows up on the fact that Pluto, which is actually not even used in classic Jyotish or Vedic astrology, we don't even look at Pluto in that system. It shows up on my IC and my the most southernmost point of my chart, which often rules the unconscious. So this would actually mimic a lot of to have a strongly placed Pluto like this that's on the IC angle would actually mimic a lot of what you would typically get in a Scorpio moon. So that's one way in which Western is stating this, is showing this thing that's so obvious to me that shows up in my Vedic chart, but in its own way in the Western chart. So let's look a little bit further. So I'm one of, like, a lot of people's charts change a lot more than mine. My ascendant just goes from 28 because it's such high degree. My ascendant and my sun both stay in Leo for my ascendant and Pisces for my sun. They just go to lower degrees of that sign. But what happens with my Sagittarius, Sagittariusness in Vedic? Because it's clear then that I have, a lot of Sagittarius is a part of my personality, right? So in Vedic, we look at what so often what the most powerful person, the name of this word is I'm forgetting it, but we look at what the highest degree planet is. So you look at all the planets, and if you have one that's say 29 point whatever 5, 6 degrees in a certain sign, it's likely that that's going to be the highest degree sign. So it's just based on on the highest number. It doesn't matter what sign it's in. It can be Aries or Pisces. It doesn't matter. It's not about where it is in terms of the signs and their progression. So for me, my highest degree sign is or highest degree planet is Saturn, and it's actually in Sagittarius. So that's where that Sagittarius would come in my personality. It would actually come in through that Saturn, which takes on significance in the Vedic chart because it's the highest degree planet, meaning it's the most powerful. Aside, it's not always the case, but in my case, it just gives it a lot of power. What else? So another thing is just the fact that in Vedic astrology, nakshatras are used. So they use zodiac signs in constellations. So they also break those constellations down into 3 or 2.5 actually, which are called nakshatras. And nakshatras take on different energies, right? So you can have like a nakshatra that is ruled by, like, say, like you're a Capricorn, a Western, and everything shifts. You might shift to a nakshatra that is in Sagittarius. This is just an example. It's not true, and there's not one that exists like this. That's in Sagittarius, but the nakshatra actually resembles more. It has more of that Capricorn Saturnian influence. So there's all types of different ways that this can show itself. I know for one of my good friends, she has a huge stellium, meaning a lot of planets in the same sign, the same house, in her 8th house in Scorpio in her Western chart. And these actually all shift, nearly all of them, to Libra in her Vedic chart. And she's very artistic, so the Libra shows itself. But then she also it's just very obvious that this is a person that has Scorpio. So where does that show up? Or at least some type of like psychic, intuitive water. Well, her moon in Western is in Leo. And what happens is that Leo moon shifts to Cancer into a very, very psychic, intuitive, kind of almost Scorpio-like. It's in Cancer, and it's a nakshatra called Ashlesha. And it, to me, the way actually Ashlesha feels is a lot, is quite similar to how she is, and it really kind of fills in the gap of, and it's very high. She has in a very high degree, so it really fills in the gap of that, of where that intense, I guess you call it intense, intuitive water placement is. And yeah, so I see this in tons of different people's charts. When I compare the two, I always find that there's a different language, but it's saying the same thing. I can't think of one part of my chart. I mean, the only thing, so what's interesting, I can talk about one other part of my birth chart is my Venus and my Mars all go to Capricorn instead of Aquarius. And also I have in my Western chart, I have Pluto square Venus, which has like always been a very obvious part of my life and relationships and things like that. So Pluto is not even taken for consideration in Vedic. So where are we seeing this Pluto square Venus, which ends up manifesting in difficulty in relationships? And it's actually shown by the fact that the North Node in Western becomes Rahu in Vedic. And basically having Rahu so close to my Venus and my Mars would create a similar effect as this Pluto square Venus, right? So it would create smoke and mirrors in relationships. And I'm not going to go too far into it, but it's because the Rahu symbolism is a little bit different than what the North Node is in Western. It's taking on a similar meaning, and you don't even really need the Pluto. And essentially, everything just somehow makes sense. It all comes together in a different way. And also we think about how different astrology has, and this is a little bit complex, it's even hard for me to understand, but astrology is based on the archetypes present at the specific times in history that they're created. So a lot that comes in Vedic astrology was meant for that space and time. So there's some meanings that don't really make sense today that are found in Vedic. Like you'll have something that like in the past was like had to do with cows, or like you'll receive like a certain amount of cows, like that's, or you'll like have luck with like cows, like obviously like or something like horses, and like that's just an example of something that changes with the times. Maybe now we've transformed that to short journeys, right? Things like that. So there's little things that have been distinguished and that have been altered with the times. So you have to think about that. But overall, in my brief experience of comparing the two, I've definitely seen how they're both correct in their own sense. And another thing that is important that I believe to be true, but I haven't like completely proven this yet, but I totally believe this, is that I believe that the Vedic astrology is looking at the soul on a more transpersonal, larger scale level, while the Western astrology is looking at, it's, I don't want to say like the more personal ego, but it's less of like a bigger picture. It's still very, very true. And there's some stuff that Western does that's just so incredible that I'm not even sure if like I'll be able to ever replicate the precision of in Vedic. But then there's things that Vedic does, especially in terms of predictive astrology, that is just so unbelievable to me that has just blown my mind away. The main one of these being what's called dashas, and dashas are just periods of time that you enter that have the archetype of different planets. So for example, you, like for me right now, I'm in my Venus period, and in 2020, next year, after 20 years of being in my Venus, I'm entering my Sun. So you look at where these planets are placed, my Sun in the 8th house conjunct Mercury, and you guess, okay, that's a really good placement for psychotherapy and for diving into the unconscious, anything esoteric or occult, astrology. So I'm probably just starting to shift into that, right? While as my Venus is in the 6th house, that's actually a very difficult placement, especially for relationships. And I've almost had to live through a lot of this. I don't want to use the word curse, but my teachers use that word about how my Venus is. Makes it difficult for relationships to work. So essentially, like we go through, like this is like shines so much light, and like a lot of times when I have like someone in my life personally or a client, even if because I don't do Vedic astrology. I'm not even close to good enough or well read enough to ask for money from someone to do that. But just for fun, I'll look at what Mahadasha they're in, and it'll just give me a lot of knowledge of like where they're at and when they can expect some type of shift. So I'll often include that into my the readings I do that are more of the astrological weather and transitory readings. So anyways, I hope this video has been helpful. It's really interesting. Like a lot of people say that you shouldn't study both Vedic and Western. I don't buy it. I mean, for me, I think that there's no harm in doing it. Like people say you can get confused and you kind of have to forget one to dive into the other one. I mean, I don't know if I'll ever become a Vedic astrologer. I mean, who knows? You never know. I really love Western astrology, and I'm happy with my practice and the clients I have, so I don't see why I would shift that anytime soon. But yeah, I would encourage anyone to look into that and to try to look into their own chart and see how the two systems can speak in a different way and say the same thing in different ways. It's pretty interesting. Thanks so much for watching this, and I hope you have a good day. I will leave all my information in my bio if you're interested in getting a reading or getting in touch with me for any reason. Thank you so much. Have a good day.